Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Beast, Riding the Rails and Dodging Narcos on the Migrant Trail, by Óscar Martinez, translated by Daniela Maria Ugas and John Washington. Foreword by Francisco Goldman. Narrated by Timothy Andrés Pabon. Foreword by Francisco Goldman. ElFaro.net advertises itself as Latin America's first online digital newspaper. It is based in El Salvador and was founded in 1998. Many enterprises nowadays, individual and collective, proclaim themselves, or would like to be considered, alternative, and as part of a vanguard showing the way forward. But ElFaro.net truly is both. It certainly offers an alternative to the kinds of fare provided by El Salvador's familiar newspapers, complicit with a political and moneyed establishment, and thoroughly mediocre at best, as is true of the establishment press and other media throughout Latin America. And ElFaro.net is a vanguard because it is so very excellent in every way that it has become a beacon of the possible, of the ambitious, of the truly revolutionary, to young journalists up and down the continent. To the question of how it can be that the Bloomsbury of Latin American journalists has sprung up in tiny El Salvador and not in Mexico City or Buenos Aires, one answer is, why not? And another is, actually, it makes perfect sense. And yet another is, isn't this just what the digital age promised? No more periphery, the center is everywhere. Except, it takes a visionary editorial team and exceptionally courageous and talented journalist writers to fulfill such an idealized and wishful supposition. ElFaro.net was founded in 1999, 6 years after the end of El Salvador's civil war, by two young Salvadorans who'd been raised abroad, the sons of political exiles. When they returned home to their war-devastated country and found it still as violent or even more violent than before, saturated by organized crime and gangs, the infamously sadistic maras terrorizing poor urban neighborhoods and towns, they decided that there really could be such a thing as cutting-edge journalism, and that it should and could make a difference. And what is cutting-edge journalism? It means writing about what nobody else dares to write about, at least not thoroughly or memorably, and getting as close to your subjects as you can, and taking as much time as you need, and then somehow knowing how to write the hell out of what you find, capturing mareros' ways of speaking, their jargon and gestures, as if the writer himself has been a marero all his life, deciphering their codes, freezing from them their life stories, their secrets, their most scarifying and gruesome stories, their odd vulnerabilities, learning the layout and nuances of their places, and doing the same with their rivals, their victims, with the police and prosecutors who pursue them, and shaping that material into compelling narratives that engross the listener and deliver much larger and more unsettling meanings than those found in ordinary newspaper dispatches. I hadn't read stories like those published in ElFaro.net anywhere else. Such high-quality and important work doesn't go unnoticed, and the digital newspaper's writers have gathered some of the world's most prestigious journalism awards. Co-founder Carlos Dada, the current editor, won the Maria Moores Cabot Prize, and Carlos Martinez won the Ortega y Gasset Award. Now Carlos's brother, Óscar Martinez, has produced The Beast, originally Los Migrantes que no importan, the migrants who don't matter, about the Central American migrants who trek across Mexico to reach the northern border and the United States. With mind-boggling courage and commitment, Óscar Martinez went where no other journalist from Mexico or elsewhere had gone, exploring the migrants' routes in a series of trips from bottom to top that take in not only the infamous train known as La Bestia — he rode on that train 8 times — but also the desolate byways traveled on foot, where the very worst things happen. Despite being a compilation of dispatches published over 2 years in ElFaro.net, the book has the organic coherence, development, and narrative drive of a novel. It reads like a series of pilgrims' tales about a journey through hell. Even calling it hell feels like an understatement. The Beast is, along with Catherine Boo's Behind the Beautiful Forevers, the most impressive non-fiction book I've read in years. I first read it in Spanish a couple of years ago, after it was recommended to me by Alma Guillermo Prieto in an edition published in 2010 by Icaria, a small press in Barcelona. In Mexico and Latin America, the book might as well have not existed. How could it be that this book, which should be urgent reading for all Mexicans at all interested in what occurs in their country, was not immediately published in Mexico? Perhaps because it holds up a mirror to Mexico almost too depraved, grotesque, and heartless to believe. In different ways, it holds up just as painful a mirror to the United States and another to Central America. Finally, The Beast was rescued and published in late 2012 by the Oaxaca-based Sur Plus Ediciones, one of a handful of excellent small presses in Mexico that have reinvigorated the country's literary landscape. Thanks to their initiative, the book was discovered by Verso, which has brought out the present edition in English. Over the last few months, I've had many conversations with people who've read the book, which I urge upon everybody I meet. They always speak, of course, about the importance of what it conveys, and in awed tones about its author's courage. And then they always add, "But how come that cabron writes so well?" Though only in his mid-20s when he wrote the book, Óscar Martinez writes really, really well, with liveliness, precision, vividly observed detail, and a restraint which it must have been terribly difficult to sustain, considering the rage he often felt over what he was witnessing, with astonishing and never superfluous poetry, and most of all, with a genius for conveying human character. Martinez's literary gift is what lifts The Beast into a work that delivers much more than journalistic information, though its information is of pressing and illuminating importance, and makes it a masterpiece. Each chapter narrates a unique story. At times the book reminded me of Isaac Babel's Red Army Tales. "I'm running," Honor says, his head ducked down, not meeting my eyes, "so I don't get killed." So begins the first pilgrim's tale, in a migrant shelter in southern Oaxaca, where Martinez meets Honor and his two Salvadoran brothers, embarking on the journey north without any set plan, without knowledge of its dangers, traps, and rules. Yet it's all important to know what you're doing on this journey, the book will teach us, again and again. It should be required listening for any migrant setting out across Mexico. Along the way, only these widely scattered migrant shelters, most run by the Catholic Church, offer some respite from the hardship and unyielding fear of the journey, though not entirely, because the shelters are also infiltrated by spies working for the Zetas cartel and other criminal groups, or corrupt coyotes who prey on the migrants. The first time I asked him, though, he told me he was migrating to try his luck. He said he was only looking for a better life, una vida mejor, which is a common saying on the migrant trails. But here in southern Mexico, now that Auner and I are alone, with the train tracks next to us and a cigarette resting between his lips, now that we're apart from his two younger brothers who are playing cards in the migrant shelter's common room, he admits that the better word to describe his journey is not migration, but escape. "And will you come back?" I ask him. "No," he says, still looking at the ground. "Never." "So you're giving up your country?" "Yeah." The brothers' lives have been threatened, but they don't know by whom. At home, their mother was killed by gang assassins, perhaps in reprisal for one of the brothers having witnessed and denounced the murder by drunks of a friend who was a gang member, or perhaps it was because their mother witnessed a gang assassination outside her little store. Death isn't simple in El Salvador, Martinez writes. It's like a sea. You're subject to its depths, its creatures, its darkness. Was it the cold that did it? The waves? A shark? A drunk? A gangster? A witch? Many migrants head north to flee the economic devastation of their countries, the paucity of decent work or pay, in search of a better life in the United States. Good wages, the chance to send money back to their families, to save enough to build a home or start a small business when they return. But Óscar Martinez also introduces us to many people who are fleeing out of fear. A young gang member running for his life because the rival gang has conquered his gang's turf, and had he stayed, his death at their hands would have been assured. A policewoman fleeing because her 2 successive police husbands had been murdered, and while she was in mortal danger too, she feared even more being no longer able to endure her dread and despair, and turning her own pistol on herself and her baby daughter. Orphaned girls in their early teens, fleeing homes where step-parents, step-brothers, or other informal guardians regularly rape them or violently enslave them. All are in flight from fear, only to exchange it for the different, unrelenting fear they will discover and learn to endure on the journeys north, with little chance, increasingly little chance, we learn in The Beast, of ever actually reaching the United States. Along the way, they will be preyed upon by cartels, police, Mexican immigration authorities, maras, and random rural gangs, robbed, enslaved, forced into narco-assassin squads, and raped. An estimated 8 out of 10 migrant women who attempt to cross Mexico suffer sexual abuse along the way, sometimes at the hands of fellow migrants. Migrants are kidnapped en masse by Zetas, with the complicity of corrupted and terrorized local police and other authorities, and of treacherous coyotes, so that their families back home or awaiting them in the U.S. can be extorted. Meanwhile, the captives are tortured, raped, and sometimes massacred. Thousands upon thousands of migrants have been murdered in Mexico, and many others die by falling from La Bestia. As many as 70,000, some experts estimate, lie buried along the death corridor of the migrants' trail. If the travelers do reach the northern border and actually manage to cross into the United States, they most likely will be captured by the U.S. Border Patrol and be deported or jailed. Martinez journeys north with the 3 brothers, Auner, El Chele, and Pitbull, on a bus from Ixcuintepec to Oaxaca via a mountain road where there are few migration authority checkpoints because it is so winding and treacherous. How finely and intimately Martinez captures the quiet tension of that ride, the young men's nerves, their quality of strangers in a strange land. El Chele and Auner are sleeping in successive rows behind him. They decided to spread themselves out in case a cop came looking for undocumented migrants, but they still stick out enough to almost glow. 3 young men with loose pants and tennis shoes on a bus entirely full of indigenous folks. And they're not just migrating, remember, they're fleeing, you can tell. They're the ones with the light sleep, the ones who peek out the windows when the bus comes to a stop. It doesn't matter if the bus stops for someone to pee or to pick up passengers. The boys get nervous every time. In Oaxaca, they part ways. The brothers travel on, first by bus. They keep in touch, texting by cell phone. Martinez names 7 other young migrants he's met, who during those months of August and September are killed on the journey. And then comes a final text, on the move, about to board the train. After that, the communication goes dead. The brothers no longer answer messages. Martinez learns that there has been a mass kidnapping in Reynosa, 35 migrants seized from the train. Where are you? How are you? Nothing. No response. End of chapter. La Arrocera is what the migrants call the 262-kilometer route through southern Chiapas, from Tapachula to Arriaga, where they climb onto the trains. They avoid the highways and roads because of checkpoints variously manned by the Migration Authority, police, and army. In Chiapas, most denunciations filed by migrants are against the police, writes Martinez, and instead hike through mountains, jungles, and ranchlands. Migrants consider the route lawless territory, the most dangerous of the entire trek across Mexico, and it is called La Arrocera only because in a small settlement along the way, there is an abandoned rice warehouse. En route to El Norte, I saw and began to understand that the bodies left here are innumerable, and that rape is only one of the countless threats a migrant confronts. Along the paths, there are skeletons, the machete-split skulls of migrants. Bones here aren't a metaphor for what's past, but for what's coming. There are peasant ranchers who pretend to tell the migrants which path to take, instead directing them to where rural gangs, some informal, armed with machetes, others more organized, armed with high-caliber rifles, await to assault them. Apparently, this remote countryside wasn't always populated by murderers, robbers, and rapists. What happened was that when the Mexicans living there noticed the migrants crossing their lands, so vulnerable, so frightened of ever denouncing any crime committed against them for fear of being deported, so determined only to reach their destination, their predatory instincts were awakened, and they adapted to what this new situation offered. The beast offers a terrifying lesson in human cruelty, cowardice, greed, and depravity. Likewise, the Zetas had never before included mass kidnappings in their criminal repertoire. But when they noticed the migrants traveling through their territories, they seized upon what they perceived as a new business opportunity, forcing coyotes to work for them and police and state authorities into complicity. When one badly beaten migrant managed to escape the house in a small town where he was being held along with dozens of other migrants and went to the police to make a report, the police returned him to the kidnappers. Martinez and his photographer travel the Arrocera route. We walk on, telling ourselves that if we get attacked, we get attacked. There's nothing we can do. The suffering that migrants endure on the trail doesn't heal quickly. Migrants don't just die. They're not just maimed or shot or hacked to death. The scars of their journey don't only mark their bodies. They run deeper than that. Living in such fear leaves something inside them, a trace and a swelling that grabs hold of their thoughts and cycles through their heads over and over. It takes at least a month of travel to reach Mexico's northern border. Few think about the trauma endured by the thousands of Central American women that have been raped here. Who takes care of them? Who works to heal their wounds? An expert on the migrants tells Martinez, "The biggest problem isn't in what we can see. It's beyond that. The problem lies in a particular understanding of things, in an entire system of logic. Migrants who are women have to play a certain role in front of their attackers, in front of the coyote, and even in front of their own group of migrants. And during the whole journey, they're under the pressure of assuming this role. I know it's going to happen to me, but I can't help but hope that it doesn't." There's an expression among the women migrants, cuerpomatic. The body becomes a credit card, a new platinum edition Bodymatic, which buys you a little safety, a little bit of cash, and the assurance that your travel buddies won't get killed. Your Bodymatic, except for what you get charged, buys a more comfortable ride on the train. A migrant named Saul tells Martinez atop La Bestia about a scene that's permanently branded on his mind when an 18-year-old Honduran girl he was traveling with fell from the train. "I saw her," he remembers, "just as she was going down, with her eyes open so wide." And then he was able to hear one last scream, quickly stifled by the impact of her body hitting the ground. In the distance, he saw something roll, like a ball with hair. Her head, I guess. Throughout Central America and Mexico, as in the neighborhoods populated in the United States by migrants who managed to reach it after years of widespread and untreated, silently endured trauma, there must be entire communities that could be converted into mental health clinics, or even asylums. The migrants are not just pushovers and victims. Martinez shows how rugged and capable they often are. These working men, stonemasons, construction workers, mechanics, peasant farmers, and how bravely they often fight back, protecting their companions and their women from being forced off the train and herded into the forest. This is the law of the beast that Saul knows so well. There are only 3 options: give up, kill, or die. On one of his rides atop the train, Martinez witnesses and grippingly describes a series of battles between the migrants and their attackers, who pursue them in white pickup trucks. He notes in conclusion, after the attack on the train, where there were more than 100 armed assaults, at least 3 murders, 3 injuries, and 3 kidnappings, there was not a single mention of the incident in the press. Neither the police nor the army showed up, and nobody filed a single report. Out of indifference, moral mediocrity, and fear, the Central American migrants' plight has gone mostly unnoticed in Mexico and the United States. Now and then, an especially large massacre, like that of 73 migrants in Tamaulipas in 2011, brings some media focus, but it passes all too quickly. Catholic Church leaders such as the priest Alejandro Solalinde in Oaxaca have been at the forefront of efforts to force Mexican authorities to provide better protection for migrants. Of the many silences that overlay this story, one of the most profound is that of the United States, where the tragedy of the migrants is what news editors call a non-story, one to which Washington could not be more indifferent. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, the United States fanned the civil wars of Central America, supporting repressive governments, devastating those countries, and helping to create cultures of violence, all in the name of defeating communism, with a promise to nurture just, democratic societies once peace was attained. There was no nurturing, no rebuilding, and even after the wars were over, there was no peace. The United States mostly turned its back, and now it spurns the offspring who flee what it created in Central America. Óscar Martinez travels the length of the now nearly impregnable northern border, which has become a walled war zone where the U.S. carries out a nightly battle against the Mexican cartels that use ever more ingenious methods to deliver their drugs across it. Here the cartels consider the migrants a nuisance, forcing them to search for ever more remote and dangerous slivers of land where they might be able to pass. Here, too, they face kidnappings, assaults, betrayals, and rapes. In the book's final chapter, set in Nuevo Laredo, Martinez follows a Honduran migrant named Julio Cesar. It is nearly impossible to cross in Nuevo Laredo, where the strong currents of the Rio Bravo regularly drown the desperate migrants who try to swim it. But Julio Cesar studies the river with the meticulous patience of a frontier tracker, walking far outside the city until he discovers a remote spot where the waters are shallower and an island divides and weakens the current. He will wait several months until April in the dry season, when the river will be even lower, to attempt his crossing. Julio Cesar incarnates many of the book's lessons: patience, courage, attentiveness, getting as close to the subject of concern as one can, the difference between knowing and not knowing. Those are the book's closing words. In some ways they encapsulate the methods Óscar Martinez followed in his own crossing over into the hidden and terrifying lives of the Central American migrants. 1. On the road, Oaxaca. There are those who migrate to El Norte because of poverty. There are those who migrate to reunite with family members, and there are those, like the Alfaro brothers, who don't migrate. They flee. Recently, close to the brothers' home in a small Salvadoran city, bodies started hitting the streets. The bodies fell closer and closer to the brothers' home, and then, one day the brothers received the threat. The story that follows is the escape of Auner, Pitbull, and El Chele, 3 migrants who never wanted to come to the United States. "I'm running," Auner says, his head ducked down, not meeting my eyes, "so I don't get killed." The first time I asked him, though, he told me he was migrating to try his luck. He said he was only looking for a better life, una vida mejor, which is a common saying on the migrant trails. But here in southern Mexico, now that Auner and I are alone, with the train tracks next to us and a cigarette resting between his lips, now that we're apart from his two younger brothers who are playing cards in the migrant shelter's common room, he admits that the better word to describe his journey is not migration, but escape. And will you come back? I ask him. No, he says, still looking at the ground. Never. So you're giving up your country? Yeah. You'll never return? No. Only if anything happens to my wife or daughter. And then you'll come back. Just to kill them. Just to kill who? I don't even know. Auner knows nothing of the men he runs from. Back home, he left behind a slew of unsolved murders. Now, blindly, he runs and hides. He feels he has no time to reflect, no time to stop and think what connections he and his brothers might have with those bodies on the streets. Auner left El Salvador, along with his wife and 2-year-old daughter, 2 months ago. Since then, he's guided his 2 brothers with patience and caution. At only 20 years old, he tries hard to keep his fear in check so as not to make a false step. He doesn't want to fall into the hands of migration authorities, doesn't want to get deported and sent back to El Salvador, which would mean starting again from scratch. Because no matter what they're put through, or how long it takes, they must escape, he says. They must get north, to El Norte. Get pushed back a little? Okay, Auner says. It might happen, but we'll only use it to gain momentum. Without a word, Auner gets up, ending our conversation. We walk down the dusty sidewalk back toward the migrant shelter. We're in the small city of Ixtepec, in the state of Oaxaca, the first stepping stone of my journey with them. At the shelter, a place made up of palm roof huts and half-built laundry rooms, Auner huddles next to El Chele and Pitbull, his younger brothers. El Chele has a boyish face, light skin, and a head of curly hair. Pitbull has the hardened face of an ex-con and the calloused hands of a laborer. Auner is the quiet one. A humid heat wraps around us, so thick I feel I could push it away. The brothers are talking about the next step in their escape. There's a decision that needs to be made. Stay on the train like stowaways, or take the buses through indigenous mountain towns with the hope that they can avoid checkpoints. A journey through the mountains would take them through the thick, green Oaxaca jungle, well off the migrant train rails, but it's a route studded with checkpoints and migration authorities, and usually only taken with the help of a guide or coyote. Auner first heard of the trail thanks to Alejandro Solalinde, the priest who founded and runs this migrant shelter. Solalinde is a man who understands the value in giving an extra option, even one so dangerous to those who flee. In contrast, the voyage by train would have Auner and his brothers clinging like ticks onto its roof struts for at least 6 hours en route to Medias Aguas, Veracruz, the home turf of Los Zetas. They'd then have to hide in ditches on the outskirts of the town, waiting for the next train, ready at any moment to sprint for their lives. The infamous gang known as Los Zetas was formed in 1999 by the narco-trafficker Osiel Cárdenas Guillén, founder of the powerful Gulf Cartel, arrested in 2003, and a U.S. prisoner since 2007. Cárdenas originally created Los Zetas to act as his organization's armed wing, composed of 31 elite Mexican Army deserters, some of whom had trained at the U.S.-led School of the Americas, but the group expanded and evolved, becoming increasingly, violently autonomous. By 2001, the group had already added to its brutal money-making repertoire the mass kidnappings of undocumented migrants for ransom money. By 2007, it had broken away to form an independent cartel. In 2009, the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, called the Zetas simply Mexico's most organized and dangerous group of assassins. The answer to the Alfaro brothers' question,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?